There are young people who believe that to succeed, you just need to move fast, take the shortest path, and get what you want as quickly as possible. But life, it's not a race. It's a journey. A journey where sometimes the moments we call lost are the very ones that lead us to exactly where we need to be. This is the story of a young woman named Lynn, someone who used to hate slowness, who once looked down on old-fashioned values, and someone who traveled far and wide, only to realize that the most precious things aren't always waiting at the finish line. Sometimes they're found in every single step we take. Her journey began with something that seemed so small, a map and a quiet sentence from her soft-spoken father. Go find the sacred clay if you truly want to understand what matters most. Lynn grew up in a quiet valley, where the morning mist still clung to the old tile roofs, and thin trails of smoke drifted skyward from her father's pottery kiln at dawn. Their small house nestled gently on a hillside, surrounded by wide fields and the soft, soothing sounds of nature. But to Lynn, all of it felt like a beautiful cage. The young girl carried a restless and dreamy heart. She believed that real life existed in cities lit by dazzling lights, places where people made it big overnight, where everything was fast, easy, modern, and thrilling. To her, her father's craft, making pottery, was nothing more than a relic of the past. Slow, dirty, meaningless, a dead-end job with no future. Her father was a quiet man, thin and weathered, his face often dusted with a faint layer of gray clay. Every morning before the sun was fully up, he would rise silently, stir the earth, knead the clay with his rough hands, and tend the fire with care, as if his entire world revolved around each lump of earth, each softest from a kiln. He never scolded Lynn for her laziness or daydreaming. Instead, he would simply watch her with thoughtful eyes, and now and then whisper, "You'll understand when you're ready." But Lynn had no desire to understand. She blamed her father for keeping her trapped in this small, sleepy town. She blamed life for not giving her the wings to fly like others did. She craved success, but without the struggle. Her father's advice felt like the dry, outdated ramblings of an old man, irrelevant and not worth listening to. She spent most of her time scrolling online, watching inspirational videos she never followed through on. She skimmed through photos of successful young people, wondering why her life seemed stuck in place. To her, patience was a luxury. She wanted everything, now, fully and effortlessly. What she didn't know was that buried in all those dull, dusty days, in the old kiln her father lit each morning, a new path was quietly waiting, a journey with no loud applause or spotlight, but one powerful enough to awaken her heart. That morning, the air was crisp and cool. A light drizzle fell gently on the old tile roof. The pottery kiln still burned bright, and the smell of damp earth lingered in the air. Lynn dragged herself downstairs, half asleep, ready to scroll through her feed and waste another day. But her father, the man of few words, spoke first. "Lynn." His voice wasn't loud, but was deep and clear. She paused, surprised to see him sitting at the table. In front of him, an old cloth bag, a weathered notebook, and a hand-drawn map. "You've always asked me," he began, "why I've stayed with this old pottery kiln all these years, haven't you?" He didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on the misty hills outside the window. Lynn didn't answer. She'd never thought that question mattered. Her father placed a hand on the notebook. "When I was your age, I once heard a story that somewhere out there, hidden in the remote mountains, there's a vein of sacred clay, and those who find it can create pieces so beautiful, the whole world stops to listen. That clay, it's said to have a soul. I dreamed of finding it once. But life had other plans." Lynn sat quietly. Something stirred inside her, a strange mix of curiosity, doubt, and something she couldn't quite name, something tender. "Now," he said softly, "I want you to go in my place." He slid the cloth bag toward her. Inside were clothes for all seasons, a few packets of dried food, some loose cash, a small knife, his pottery notes, and a hand-drawn map. "You don't have to go," he added. But if you're still searching for something greater than yourself, then maybe this is your chance. Lynn looked down at the map. Its rough, scribbled lines. Its hand-marked resting spots. Forks in the road, forest edges, mountain peaks. It was crude, vague, but it made something inside her flutter. For the first time, her father wasn't holding her back. He was giving her a choice. To leave, to explore, to fail if she must. No pressure, only one quiet message. Go if you truly want to understand. Not the clay, but yourself. Lynn held the map in her hands. The internet pages, full of hollow promises, suddenly felt meaningless. She looked at her father. He was still the same quiet man he'd always been. But this time, she saw something she had always missed. Faith. That afternoon, Lynn packed her things, shouldered her backpack, and began to walk. No promises of return, but for the first time, a small fire had been lit within her. The journey began with eager footsteps. Lynn felt like the heroine of a grand fairy tale. For the first time in her life, she was leaving the familiar countryside, leaving behind the old pottery kiln, stepping out of her father's shadow to seek something meaningful on her own terms. But it didn't take long for the true weight of the journey to set in. The backpack she thought was light grew heavier with every mile. The first trails led through scorched grasslands, where the blazing sun and dry winds cracked her lips. She fumbled with the map. The symbols that once looked like adventure now felt like a maze. She couldn't tell if she was on track or completely lost. At night, the forest turned bitter cold. She struggled to light a fire with damp twigs, her hands shaking in the wind. She had believed she was strong, but when the howls of wild animals echoed from deep in the woods, fear rose in her chest like a crashing wave. One night, she slept under a tree, soaked to the bone from unexpected rain. Another day, she wandered into a maze of cornfields. Her feet blistered from too many steps. Once a stranger stopped her on the trail, offering to trade food, with a look that made her clutch her bag tighter. In moments like those, all Lynn wanted was to go back to the warmth of home, to her father's simple meals, to the smoke curling from the pottery kiln. And yet, on that very path, she met someone, an old woman living in a tiny shack deep in the woods. The woman didn't ask who she was. She simply smiled, handed Lynn a cup of warm tea, and said gently, "Everyone has to get lost once, to know what they truly need." That sentence stayed with Lynn for days. It didn't make the path any easier, but it gave her a reason to rise each time she fell. Little by little, she learned to read the signs on tree bark, to feel the wind and guess the direction, to make use of daylight hours wisely. She learned to dry her own food, collect rainwater, and mend torn clothes, using coarse thread and a wooden needle from a small toolkit her father had packed. Every scraped knee, every hunger pang, every cold night, they no longer broke her down like they used to, not because she was tougher, but because something inside her was shifting. Lynn was beginning to understand. The journey itself, with all its setbacks and struggles, wasn't keeping her from the treasure. It was the treasure she had been seeking all along. The journey stretched on longer than Lynn had imagined. At first, she thought it would take a few weeks, at most. But then came the dry season, followed by the rains. The burning days gave way to cutting winds. And with each passing season, the world around her changed. And quietly, so did she. In spring, she walked through a wildflower field in full bloom. A soft breeze stirred the air, lifting tiny petals into a fluttering rain of color. For the first time in many days, Lynn stopped walking, not because she was tired, but because something in her wanted to sit, to look, to breathe, to feel. She sat among the flowers, her thoughts finally still. A soft warmth rose in her chest, a kind of peace she hadn't felt since she first began chasing after something greater. Then summer came. Lynn met a blind man living alone in a small hut near the edge of the forest. He spent his days shaping clay into strange, rough figures, pieces that weren't polished or perfect, but held a strange kind of calm. He didn't ask where she was going, didn't offer advice. He just said in a slow, gentle voice, I don't need to see the clay. I only need to feel it. Those words stayed with her long after. As she walked, Lynn began to pay attention to the way rain fell on leaves, to the whisper of wind threading through the cliffs, to the golden wash of sunset spilling over the hills. She stopped staring only at the map. Instead, she learned to listen to the world, to herself, to each fleeting moment. When autumn arrived, the leaves turned. The forests she passed blazed in crimson, gold, and amber. Like living paintings, Lynn began journaling. Not just the roads she traveled, but what she felt. Every place she stepped into, she left behind a trace of herself. A pressed flower in her notebook, a scribbled sketch, a quiet goodbye. She met strangers, an old woman who let her sleep near the fire, a child who broke a roasted corn cake in half to share. None of them were rich, none were famous, but they gave her something priceless. Simple kindness, without conditions. And it was these small things that touched Lynn's soul in ways no grand lesson ever had. Slowly, she began to see. Perhaps this journey was never truly about finding a magical kind of clay. Perhaps it was about something else entirely, about finding the heart she had long left behind, the one that could still feel wonder at the quiet beauty of the world. After nearly a year of wandering, Lynn finally stood before the place her father had circled in bold red ink on a map. A deep valley nestled beneath a wall of gray cliffs, marked by a single leaning tree at its edge. She had imagined this moment would be filled with triumph, that her heart would swell, that joy would burst from her chest. But strangely, there was only silence. No joy, no sorrow, just a quiet, hollow stillness, as if she herself no longer knew what she was waiting for. The wind slipped through her sleeves. Clouds drifted lazily above. She sat beside the old tree and began to dig. Her hands soon darkened with dirt. Her fingernails cracked as she clawed at the hardened earth. She dug to the left, nothing. She turned to the right, still nothing. She cleared leaves, searched the cracks between stones, lifted roots with trembling fingers. One day passed, then two. By the third, her arms ached, her legs throbbed. She lay on her back beneath the tree, sunlight spilling through the canopy above. There was nothing here. No box, no hidden jar of gold, no magical relic. Only dirt, rocks, insects, and silence. She laughed, dry and sharp. Was this it? All those miles, all those bruises and broken nights. For this? Had her father sent her on a wild chase for something that never existed? Her eyes stung, not with anger, but with disillusionment. She thought back to the hunger, the blisters, the strangers, the storms, all of it, for a patch of empty ground. That night, she built a small fire. The flames glowed softly in the dark, and the chirping of insects rose in the air like a lullaby. And then, something strange happened. She didn't feel regret. She didn't cry. She didn't curse the sky or her father's name. Instead, she felt still, not numb, not hollow, just at peace. The treasure wasn't real. But even if it had been, what difference would it make? Because the real gift was already behind her, in the journey she had walked, in the people she had met, in the strength she had found, in the heart she had uncovered. Reaching the end was never the point. This place, this destination, was only a pause, a quiet space where she could finally realize that what she had been seeking was never buried beneath the soil or drawn in ink on a map. It had been forming all along in the girl who now sat beneath the tree. Changed, whole, alive. 2 years. Such a long, startling number. When Lynn finally set foot again on the quiet village road, where everything had once begun. Her hair was longer now, sun-kissed, touched by wind and dust. Her steps were slower, not weary, but deliberate, measured. The wide-eyed girl who once chased dreams with frantic feet had grown into someone entirely different, and it showed most clearly in her eyes. No longer lost or uncertain, but deep calm, like a lake after the storm. The villagers stopped in their tracks. This was the same girl, the timid one who barely dared speak up, always drifting into daydreams. Now, she stood before them. No medals, no grand tales of conquest, but with a quiet strength in her posture and a softness in her smile that spoke louder than any glory. She greeted each person with warmth, as if she had never truly left. But everyone knew she had returned from a place beyond distance. Lynn stepped into her old home. Her father sat beneath the familiar tree, a book resting on his knee. He looked up, his eyes welled, but he said nothing. He only opened his arms, and she fell into them. For a long, long time, "I walked so far," she whispered, "and finally, I understand." He didn't ask what she had found, didn't ask if she blamed him. He just smiled and replied with the words that would stay with her for the rest of her life. Not everyone is brave enough to walk into the unknown without knowing if they'll find anything at all. That night, they sat together by the warm kitchen light. Lynn told him everything about the blind sculptor with clay-stained hands, the little boy who shared his roasted corn, the storm-soaked nights, the wrong turns, the days she nearly gave up. She held nothing back, because now she no longer needed to hide her struggles. She had learned to embrace the cracks, to carry her pain not as shame, but as part of what made her real. And her father listened, the same way he once had, when she was a child, stumbling through stories with mismatched words. The night grew still. The moon rose, full and gentle. Lynn stepped outside, stood on the porch, watching a faint light flicker in the distance. She didn't know what came next, and strangely, that felt okay. For the first time in her life, she didn't need some grand purpose. To feel alive, she knew how to listen to herself, to the world, to life, even in its imperfections. And more than anything, she knew now that her feet could carry her anywhere, because within her was a treasure no one could ever take away. Lynn's journey didn't end with a cheer of victory or a chest of gold glittering in sunlight. It ended with an embrace from her father and a heart that had quietly grown through countless seasons of wind and sun. The treasure she had spent 2 long years searching for was never buried beneath some old tree. It was hidden in each step she took beyond fear, in the hunger-filled days she refused to give up, in the kind eyes of strangers, and the wounds she learned to heal on her own. Her father was right all along. Life isn't a race to win something at the finish line. Life is to be experienced, to be listened to be grown from. Every time we fall, and every time we rise again with a smile. Sometimes we chase after something grand, so big so far, that we forget the most precious thing of all is the person we become along the way. So wherever you're headed, whatever you're chasing, whatever dreams you're holding close, please don't forget, there's no treasure waiting for you at the end of the road. The real treasure is you, the you of today, after everything. Thank you for listening. And if you can, keep walking your path, not to find something, but to become someone.